This is Wheelock Chapter 18, and we're going to learn a lot more about verbs. We're going to move on to the passive voice of verbs. So first, let's take a look at what we know so far. We know all these forms, the active, indicative, present, the imperfect, the future, the perfect, the pluperfect, the future perfect. So all this should be familiar to you. Those nice endings we learned way back when in Chapter 1. O, as, at, amas, adas, ant. And then we learn to make the imperfect. You take the stem plus bom, bos, bot, bomus, botus, bont. To make the future, you take the stem plus bo, bis, bit, bimus, bitus, bunt. The imperfect, that has a new stem, amav or laudav. We use laudo as our paradigm verb. But so you take that perfect stem and then you add e, isti, it, imus, istis, erant. The pluperfect is the perfect stem plus the imperfect forms of the verb to be, eram, eris, erat, eramus, eratus, erant. Future perfect similarly is the perfect stem plus the future forms of the verb to be, ero, eris, erat, eramus, eratus, erant. So we learned all those for the first conjugation, verbs like laudo and amo. And then we also, it's the same thing for moneo, for second declension, conjugation. Second conjugation verbs, they just have has the E in the, or in Latin, of course, that's A, has the A as the characteristic vowel, but all those endings are the same. Okay. Now we're going to move down to learn the passive voice. And today we're going to do the first half of the tenses. The present, the imperfect, and the future tenses. So, here are the endings. The first person singular of the present is the thing that's odd about that is that it drops out the A. But again, that was just like the present in the active voice was amo. There's no A in it. So likewise here we have amor. So we got my endings are, if I just look at my endings, are, ris, tour, more, mini, tour. Because that A stays in there just like it did in the present. Likewise, monao was for the present. So what do I have down here for the active voice? What do I have for the passive voice? Of course, monaor. And then or, ris, tour, more, mini, tour. So those are, that or, ris, tour, more, mini, tour, those are going to be very important because as I go through, now let's look at the imperfect. So I'm going to have the same thing. I'm going to have my ama, then I'm going to have my ba endings. But now they're bar, baris, batur, bamor, bamini, bantur. So there again is my ar, ris, tour, more, mini, tour. Same for monao. Monebar, monebaris, monebator, monebamor, monebamini, monebantor. Future, again, very similar. Amabor, baris, bitur, bimini, bimor, bimini, buntor. These you need to memorize with that whole ending because look, it goes O, E, I, U. So I just memorized the whole thing. Bor, baris, bitur, bimor, bimini, buntur. And then it's the same for moneo. Manebor, manebaris, manebatur, manebamor, manebimini, manebuntur. So those are the endings today. Obviously, these are all going to be on page 146 and 147. Those are the endings we need to learn this week. We've got one more, which is the infinitives. So the active infinitive, laudare, means to praise. Monera means to warn. So laudari, now here's my passive infinitive, means to be praised. and monere means to be warned. So let's take a look at what does passive voice and active voice mean exactly. Those are the forms we need to learn. What does it mean? In the active voice, the subject, which in Latin, of course, is in the nominative case, the subject performs the action. Paulus Marcum admonet. Paul warns Mark. So Paul is the nominative. Paul warns, admonet Marcum, and Marcum, of course, is in the accusative, because he's the direct object. Paulus Marcum admonet. Paul warns Mark. But in the passive voice, the nominative is receiving the action, while the agent of the action is shown by the ablative case, often with the preposition a or ab. So here's an example of that. Paulo Marcus admonetur. So now the subject is Marcus. Mark, admonetur, passive, is warned. Mark is warned by Paul. And you could either say Paulo, just with the nominative, just with the ablative, or you could put the preposition ab in front of it, ab Paulo, by Paul. Mark is warned. Mark is warned by Paul. So, just some other examples in English. He kicks the ball. That's active voice. What's the passive voice equivalent? The ball is kicked by him. So active voice, he eats the taco. Passive voice, the taco is being eaten by him. You get the idea. So in Latin, the thing to note is that what happens is the direct object becomes the subject. It's just a different way of speaking. It's just like in English. Sometimes we use the active voice. He kicks the ball. Sometimes we use the passive voice. The ball was kicked 40 yards through the goalpost for a field goal. So straightforward, but of course, it's going to take some getting used to. And so here is an example. Multe morte etiam facili nemis terentur. So find a verb, parse it and translate it. Here is our new ending, terentur. That intur ending tells me right away I'm in the passive voice. Still in the indicative mood. Terentur. That's just present tense. So it's passive voice, indicative mood, present tense. They were terrified. Right? So, because if we went through all these endings, so amor, I was loved. I am loved, present tense. Amaris, you are loved. Amatur, he is loved. Amamor, we are loved. Amamini, y'all are loved. Amantur, they are loved. The imperfect, I was being loved. You were being loved, etc. Future, I will be loved. You will be loved. He will be loved, etc. Okay, so we said this is present tense, didn't I? They are terrified. They are terrified, present tense. Is there a nominative to serve as the subject? Yes, multi. Many are terrified. And now we've got a little different step. This is the step we've been doing because we've only been doing active voice verbs. Is there an accusative to serve as the direct object? But now we have to change that. Now we've got, if our verb is passive, we want to ask, is there an ablative to serve as the agent of the action? Many are terrified by what? Morte. There's my ablative. Morte. Many are terrified by death. And now the rest of the words in my sentence. Etiam facile nimis. Nimis means to, T-O-O. Facile, easily. Etiam, also, or even. Many are terrified by death, even too easily. So maybe in English we'd say, many are also too easily terrified by death. Or, you'd smooth that out in English as you like. But notice. Now we got this very different step based on whether or not our verb is active voice or passive voice. If we have an active voice verb, we're going to look for an accusative and a direct object. If we've got a passive voice verb, we're going to look for an ablative, which is going to be the agent. So I encourage you to read through the rest of the discussion on pages 146 to 148. Obviously, you've got a lot of verb forms to make charts for. Present imperfect and future of the first conjugation. Present imperfect and future of the second conjugation. Vocabulary forms as well. So a lot of forms and new grammar. So this is a big lesson. Take some time this week. Study them well to make sure you are prepared for the quiz.